Okay, welcome back to part two of this fascinating interview with Adam Hardyman that we've got going on here. We are. I'm thinking very much when I was chatting to Adam in the previous interview, there was something that dropped into my head, which was a fascinating idea that recently I've been in sort of correspondence and reading some of the works of an academic researcher called Drew Hempel from America. And one of the things that he offers up out of many offerings of that Drew does is that his knowledge and understanding that when you learn music at a young age, it kind of almost like reformats or enhances your thinking and your intellectual kind of capacities because you're engaging with playing with sound at a young age. And he's gone on to find out that a lot of academics, this is what they've all done. They've learned music at a young age, and it's enhanced their kind of creative thinking. And so I just wanted to offer up that to Adam, that idea and that energy. And I know you've got children yourself, and I've got two now adult children. And so it's always fascinated me, this kind of like if you nurture or you're around sound, how it perhaps kind of is quite influential. And so I wondered, over to you, you talked about the influence of your dad in music. And so I was wondering what your perception might be of how music has sonically fed you as a young person growing up into the man that you now are. I just, or if there's any ways that you might respond to that offering.
That's an interesting one. Yeah. The power of music and the nature nurture. That's what they call the Mozart effect, isn't it? Have you seen that book?
I don't think so, no.
There was an idea that if you expose people to specific types of music, particularly Mozart, that it would somehow be healing or powerful in some way. So I don't think that it's just about Mozart. I think any music, as we were talking about earlier, can be powerful. So yeah, I guess it's really important that from an early age we are exposed to music. I think the the hearing is the very first sense, I think I'm right in saying that happens when you're an embryo and
Mm.
you're growing in your mum's tummy. Hearing is the first sense that comes online. So you're automatic, from your earliest memories, you're hearing sound, you're hearing heartbeat, you're hearing the sounds around you before any other senses. So I think that's amazingly profound.
Yeah.
That it goes back to what we were saying earlier, I think, about music as God. It's such a powerful uh, force.
Mm.
So yeah, I think mums should be playing music to their their unborn babies. I think surrounding yourself with sound is important. There's obviously lots of different types of sound. There's the sound of music, but there's the sound of nature. There's birds. There's many different types of music and sound that we can expose ourselves to. And I guess we don't have any choice in that, do we? Because sound is everywhere. You can't choose to be away from sound. So is all sound music? That's an interesting question. How do you define what's music and what's sound? That's another interesting argument. So yeah, I mean, personally, on a different level, having a father that was a pianist, he made me, not made me, did he make me? He encouraged me to practice piano and have piano lessons. And it's that classic thing as a kid, when you think, oh, I don't really want to do this. It's piano lessons. But now I'm eternally grateful that he made me do that. I don't know if he made me do it, but it felt like it was hard work at the time, but I'm so grateful for that now. It's the famous pianist Lang, is it? The Chinese pianist who was famously um, forced to play the piano a lot as a kid and in a quite brutal way by his father, I think.
Mm.
And some people would say, well, that's not good. But he's now, as he says, he's a concert pianist that plays all over the world. So he's grateful for that. So it's like, okay, should we force our
It's
siblings to do things?
curious thing because what dropped in there for me is listening to some interviews that I have with Bootsy Collins, the famous bass player who used to play with James Brown and Funkadelic. Now
Yeah.
talks about the days when he was in the band with James Brown. That there was all these amazing funk musicians. And I do love the recordings of James Brown, that funk and that energy that he encapsulated. But, he was a real taskmaster. He was finding
It's
musicians.
definitely a taskmaster, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And but he Bootsy Collins has a fascinating interview on YouTube. I think I'll link to it. It's on Red Bull Academy. But the way that he talks about that whole experience of having a taskmaster who was pushing it and pushing them and going, no, it's not good enough, or it needs to be simpler. And there's some fascinating stories about how they wrote some of the most iconic tracks on the back of a bus after a gig. And James Brown was really disciplined. They all wanted to be like having alcohol and sort of trying
Yeah.
to work stuff
Partying.
after the gigs, and he's taking them to a recording studio and they're working out these famous tracks in the back seat of the bus. And so sometimes like that idea of being outside, that the magic's outside the comfort zone, and it's fascinating. I'm sure your dad knew the power of sound, and it possibly knew about the power of its influence. So yeah, the fact that he felt passionate enough to instill it in you for whatever words you choose to put in it, he was gifting you with something that
Mhm.
possibly had possibly had ripples into your life. And there was one, yeah. Sorry, on you go.
I was going to say, I'd never, unfortunately, my father's no longer with us, but I never had that conversation about music and the connection between the music, which is the thing which fascinates me now. As a tangent, when I was in my 20s, my dad took me to a tarot card reader
Mhm.
because obviously he was into that kind of thing as well. And the tarot card reader told me something which has always stuck with me. She said, one day you will use sound to heal people.
Right,
No, music. It wasn't sound, it was music. One day we'll use music to heal people. This is when I was 20,
right.
before I was a homeopath, before I was doing any of this stuff. And that really stuck with me for lots of reasons, you know. So whether that was a premonition or whether she implanted something in my psyche, which I've been interested in ever since, who knows? But it's always been a fascinating story. So now to go back to what I was saying earlier, to get to the point where I'm using frequencies to heal people.
Mm,
I'm cautious of that word, healing people, but I'm using frequencies in my therapy,
mm.
and I'm using music, which has the same
Yeah,
core
yeah.
frequency and healing. So yeah, I never got to talk to Dad about that, which it's always after people have gone that you realize lots of things you want to ask them and talk to them about. Um, so yes, sorry, I forgot, lost my thread.
Well, I think yeah, I think we were just talking, yeah, about the kind of
Oh
potential
yes.
influence that perhaps your dad might have understood us.
Mm.
I remember once when I've always played music loud in my cars when my children were young. I remember one moment when my son, he wasn't really into the kind of music that I listened to at the time. He was maybe about 12, but I remember once playing one of my favorite tracks that was a kind of a dance-based deep house track that had a kind of vocal element to it, and I'm not really massively drawn to vocals. I'm more of an instrumental kind of person. But anyway,
Me too.
we were listening to this track in the car on the way back from school, and before the vocal came in, my son started humming the melody to the vocal before it even started. And I was just like, wow. So, like, he's obviously been exposed and heard this tune before. He's
Mhm.
remembered the melody of the vocal, and he's actually saying it like maybe like 8 bars, but humming it 8 bars before. And I was just like sat in the car going, "Wow, this is incredible." I mean, he's got a very good ear now, my son, and he's got his own relationship with sound, and I don't know quite how if you notice how important it was. I mean, he's now sort of 20 years old, and he's used to having a dad who's very buzzy with energy and always telling him about all these exciting things. But
Wonderful.
to me, that was a one isolated example of how the power of sound can would be really powerful. Like, like there you have somebody who's hearing something, it's going in and they can remember it before so it's a fascinating kind of force. And I think the other thing that was an add-on to what you said about Mozart, or you may be aware of, I think it's Alberto Tomatis.
Don't know the name, no.
I might have got the first name wrong, but there's a gentleman whose surname is Tomatis, who was a famous kind of sound explorer, sound who wrote a number of books about sound. And I've got a pair of headphones that he developed and his company developed, that you put them on and you listen to the music of Mozart, but then it cuts out certain frequencies. And
Okay.
the theory being that the frequency that's cut out, your then brain then starts to replace it and automatically. And I think one of his books, rather famously, Gérard Depardieu, the actor, had done a introduction about how this gentleman, Mr. Tomatis, had helped him with his career at the early stage. He'd found discovered him as a budding actor and managed to help him with a number of blocks. And so a long time ago, before once I bought the headphones, I went for a listening test, and they kind of like looked at the different frequencies that you can hear and the relationships that are going on in your ear. And that was really fascinating, you know. And so these headphones, I think, certainly have improved my relationship with sound internally in the structure.
Well, that sounds
Uh,
fascinating. I'd like to know more about that. I've not
yeah.
heard of that, so that does sound really interesting.
Yeah, I think there's lots of practitioners over the UK. I think some of these headphones are thought to be really helpful for children who are on the autistic spectrum.
Mhm.
It might be
Sounds not dissimilar to the binaural idea, the binaural beat idea, which
possibly.
you.
Yeah, I think there's different dimensions to it. That I mean, it's a curious one. I think when I went for my ear test by this lovely guy in London who was also a conductor for orchestras, he was a fascinating chap. But he was, uh, Mr. Tomatis has a theory that lower frequencies, bass frequencies, discharge you, and that higher frequencies charge you. I've always had a really good relationship with bass frequencies. It tends to excite and stimulate me as well. So I didn't quite kind of personally fit into that model. But he's got some amazing stories about how working with opera singers who, you know, that they were used to these high performing voices that did all sorts of parts of the vocal range. And then all of a sudden they'd struggle. And I think the theory was that basically they've kind of worn out that frequency or you know, and so they had to do some recorrection in order because they were used to doing all this powerful stuff, they overcompensated because they could sense that they couldn't hear certain frequencies anymore. And so he has an established long history, his company, I think, of helping people who have that kind of profile, but also children who have profound autism, high sensitivity. I think some of these headphones can, and the headphones also have a microphone. So the other practice is that you're supposed to listen to yourself vibrationally so that you can hear the bone vibration, not just
Okay.
the audio vibration. Because I don't know if you know this, but when I went to the Science Museum once, they have an experiment where you can bite onto a copper tube, and all of a sudden in your head you start hearing the music that's connected to so it's just proof that
Oh,
actually you've experienced sound on a vibrational level through
mhm.
bone as well. So when I'm talking to you, I hear the bone vibration and my spoken word, whereas you only hear my spoken word, and when you hear yourself, you're hearing the bone vibration. So which is why I think when you hear a recording of yourself talking out loud, frequently you go, "Oh, I sound quite different," because
Mhm.
you're not hearing the bone vibrate
Resonant.
at the same time.
It reminds me of a slightly different thing that I got into after experimenting with all these different sound bowls. I thought what I need is a chair. There's it's called a vibroacoustic chair, I think, something like that. And it's a, a mat that you put on your back of your chair, and it has four big speakers in it. And the theory is, going back to what you said about the low frequencies, it emits, or one of its programs is it emits a 40 hertz low tone. So you
Right.
sit against this chair and you turn it on, and this 40 hertz goes through your body, which is really low, really kind of sub frequency, and you really feel it. So, you know, your whole body will vibrate at that frequency. And this company that selling this chair have done a lot of research on that frequency, going back to this idea of single frequencies again. But hey, that frequency being really important for the nervous system. And if you have dementia or a nervous system problem, if you sit on this 40 hertz frequency every day for 20 minutes, it'll improve your nervous system, memory, brain, which is fascinating. So I bought one of these chairs, and um, for me, the more interesting bit of this chair is you could put any frequency you want through it. So you could put your own music through it. So hearing your own music through this chair is great because your whole body just literally vibrates with certain frequencies, and you can really experiment with that. But it also reminds me of the 110 hertz theory as well, which is another single frequency, which is the frequency that apparently is very common in ancient burial sites. There's a whole research that I can't remember the guy's name did a while ago, looking at ancient burial sites and tombs and the pyramids and kind of these geographic locations. And one of the common frequencies was 110 hertz, which is a very low frequency, bass frequency. And the thinking there was that they obviously didn't know that they were creating 110 hertz, but somehow they may have worked out that this frequency um, enhanced whatever ceremony or practices were going on in these environments. That resonant frequency would enhance the meditation, for example. So yeah, there's another interesting number, 110 and 40 deep bass frequencies. So yeah, it's an interesting idea. As I said earlier, my mind fixates on the complexity of sound rather than the specific individual frequencies. But there's still some interesting stuff going on out there, looking at individual frequencies. So yeah, we've got to be open to it all, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, you don't know which individual frequency is going to work for which individual, because
Yes,
we're all unique, aren't we?
this is true.
I've had to go on a chair that sounds pretty similar to what you did at Detox Fair last year, and that was a very interesting vibrational experience. And I've also got a wearable sub bass speaker called a Sub Pack.
Oh, that sounds good.
I don't know if you're aware of those. You put it on and it doesn't emit audio, it emits vibration. So you can either Bluetooth audio in. So when you're making music, you can be feeling the sub bass
Really?
without bothering your neighbors.
Oh, that sounds like
Um,
a gadget I've got to get.
yeah, yeah. I mean, they're around the 250 range. I don't know if they're that big mass produced. There might be duplicates of different things. The one I've got is called a sub pack. I was gifted it by a lovely person, a friend of mine. But yeah, I don't use it often enough. But I've listened to gong baths through it with gong bath
Okay.
gong bath audio vibrating on my chest, and it's just like it's really something else. So
The gong thing makes me think of something else, which is the idea of the harmonic series. Do you know much about the harmonic series?
a little bit, but not too much. No.
So the idea with um, any sound that we make, let's say a violin sound or a piano sound, has the fundamental frequency, which is the note that we hear. So say C. But on top of that, or overtones of that, will be lots of other frequencies, which are the harmonic series. Every sound has these other frequencies which are connected to it. And each one of the harmonics is, what should we say, connected to the fundamental in a kind of mathematical way. And this is a lot of where the kind of the wonderful mathematics come from when we start talking about what is pure free, why do we have just intonation as a tuning system rather than equal temperament? It's because of these wonderful mathematics that happen with these overtones when you play notes. It's very mathematical, and then the deep dive when you start getting into these different harmonics is it ends up with other ideas like sacred geometry, and how they're all the numbers seem to overlap with shapes. And so it's a fascinating deep dive, this idea of harmonics and how they relate to us. And I think gongs are interesting because they have a lot of frequencies which aren't in this harmonic series.
Right.
They
Okay.
get other
Yeah.
harmonics which our bodies aren't quite so used to. So we're used to violins and pianos and classical music or pop music because it has these set of harmonics built into the music. But gongs have a whole different array of sounds which your body kind of goes, oh, that's different because I'm not used to that.
Mm.
And it reminds me of you know the composer Leonard Bernstein,
Yeah,
the American composer.
yeah, I'll make a note of that.
West Side Story.
Mm.
He did a wonderful series of lectures in the 60s, I think, trying to explaining music to people as a conductor and composer. And one of the questions that he got asked regularly was, why does a minor key make us feel sad and a major key make us feel happy? What is that? So he said it's easy to explain when you understand the harmonic series. So the harmonic series, you play a note, these harmonics all happen at regular intervals, and they're all mathematically pure. So the first harmonic is an octave above the initial tone, and then we have a fifth, a perfect fifth, and then another octave, then in the third. All the normal major scale harmonics are within the harmonic series. And when you get to the 18th harmonic, so if you see these harmonics, there's lots of these little harmonics that happen when you play a note, and the 18th harmonic is the first minor third that happens. Okay, so that's the first time a minor interval that would create a minor chord comes into this series. And it's the first interval which is interference. Okay, so all these mathematics are lining up beautifully, major intervals, and until you get to the 18th harmonic, and it's the minor third, it's interference. It's not mathematically correct with all these other. So it's the first interval which your body goes, oh, that's different. That causes interference in the body. So literal interference mathematically makes you go,
Yeah.
that's different. And we interpret that as sad or melancholy or different to the major, which I thought was a beautiful explanation of,
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
why these things affect us in the way we do. You could just again break it down to frequencies and how your body interprets those impure or dissonant or interfering frequencies. I
Yeah.
thought that was a lovely explanation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's kind of fascinating, isn't it? I think when you were when I discovered electronic music in my early days, I was ended up getting into slightly more edgier kind of alternative electronic music, some of which I listen back to now and I go, oh, it was quite dark, a bit kind of like the energy around it was a bit angry, kind of teenager kind of
We'll
appealed.
go for it.
Uh,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. And so now I know some people who still like listening to it, and I'm like, no, I like uplifting kind of electronic music now. But and so I'm quite particular, I would say, about what I kind of musically feed myself. But uh, I think the whole vibrational thing is a kind of interesting relationship. Um,
it's fascinating. It's a deep dive, and I'm still, as you can probably tell from our talking today, I'm still trying to work it all out, what it all means. But as I said, I do try and understand it. What is resonant, what is dissonant, what is happy, what is sad. It's all music at the end of the day. And I go back to what we were saying earlier about how music is ultimately, it's a very complex thing and it can make you feel different ways, but it is ultimately um, a a connection to the divine. It's the only way I can put it. To go back to what we were saying earlier, it's all different manifestations of a complexity which is fascinating.
Yeah, sure. And I guess the simple thing would be how does it make you feel? I've got like when you were chatting about gongs and sound bowls, my inner nerd when I got the sound bowls, there was like I had an app on my iPad and I was like, oh, I wonder what frequencies the bowl's making. So I play the bowl and I could see all the
Yes, I've done that. Yeah.
and then I could see what the other so I've got two bowls that I bought in one shop in a particular day. But on the day I was very much like, oh, like my partner had a singing bowl at home that was machine made and
Hmm.
quite a high kind of tone. Never really gelled with it that much. But when we were in the shop, as soon as I was playing these ones, I was like, they were very responsive, and straight away I was like, oh wow, I need to get these two bowls, and at a very reasonable price, and it was really
That
lovely.
one behind you, is it?
Yeah, I've got a couple behind me. Yeah, and what I find really fascinating though is sometimes I do believe that vibrationally they're very receptive to your state and where you at. So if I'm in the garden barefoot on the ground. But sometimes I believe it's like tuning into what my vibration is now and what it needs to give me. So sometimes well, like one of the bows can be quite low or broad in the spectrum of sound, but then sometimes it can just naturally go quite high. And I'm like going, my mental attachment side is going, why is it not doing the the lower kind of stuff? But I'm thinking vibrationally, these things are kind of beautifully made, artfully made by people who've got years of skills kind of making them. Mine's aren't these handmade kind of crystal bowls and machine made. That you can tell if somebody's made a lot of time. But I think just that, yeah, I think it's fascinating that idea that something can be responsive to you as well. I don't know if that resonates with you or.
Yeah. It reminds me of, so at the beginning of the conversation, you said you came into your attention. I came into your attention through the iPad music that I was doing. And then I stopped doing that. And the reason I stopped doing that is because I was exploring modular synthesis. Yeah. So one of the reasons that one would do that is to get away from the screen. The screens are great, but it is, you know, it's computers. What can we say about screens and computers? And the beauty of modular is you start with a sine wave. It's a very basic, simple idea. You start with a pure sound, and then you sculpt it from there into what you want. So I think it's a purer form of making music for me because it's coming out of the computer. And yeah, it kind of fits with all the ideas we're talking about at the moment. And it's not tuned, the tuning thing, it's modular synths. You're not necessarily tuning it to a specific frequency. A lot of the time, we're just saying, okay, that sounds right. I'll go with that, and not quantizing it and just moving with sound. And it never stops, with modular synth. It starts, and the whole time you don't start and stop and cut and paste and go back to the beginning and then chop, and it's just constantly evolving over
Yeah.
time. And
And
your job is to go on a journey with it. It's a real journey for me, and you
you very
often end up
you very focused
something.
on how it feels to you as you're making it. Is that what you're saying?
Um, I probably should be more focused. I feel, yeah, I suppose so. It's a journey, and that's what I like about it. The journey is ending up. I suppose it's like a meditation, more like a meditation, because it's not about. I'm not thinking so much. It's just taking me on a journey, and you end up with something. And often you think, "How did I get here? I have no idea." Going back to what you were saying about the guys on stage, it's like you get into a meditation, you just end up somewhere. And that's a beautiful thing. So yeah, that's what I've been doing. And that kind of maybe fits with the crystal bowl thing, and more pure. I'm cautious of these words, more pure, but
Mm.
I think you get what I mean about the idea of this flow,
Yeah.
musical flow.
And where have your modular sound recordings got to yet? Are you recording them? Is there going to be some place where you can share these meditative journeys with other people soon? Or
Yes, it is. Another thing I've been thinking about is the time. I mean, this is a whole nother conversation, but the subject of perfectionism
yeah,
comes to mind whenever I think about finishing something. So there's the meditative journey with music, but then when I think about sharing it, my perfectionist mind comes in and goes, okay, that it needs to be a certain quality. I don't know, but it's so long story short, I'm working on getting into these pieces to a point where, so I've recorded some.
yeah,
I'm trying to get into the place where I'm happy to record them, to share them. But yeah, that does go back to the perfectionism thing, going back to the Lang Lang story about the music, and your father that wants you to be a musician. A lot of that is about perfectionism. It's about perfecting something. So there's a kind of a battle there. There's the flow of the modular synthesizers and the frequencies and the meditation. And then there's the brain, which comes in at some point and goes, okay, this needs to be a certain way for me to share it. I suppose that's a personal battle, shall we say?
what drops in for me though is that about attachment to like perceptions of music that you're kind of like your inner critic kind of
Oh,
voice.
100%, yes.
There's a fascinating guy that I've discovered in the last couple of years called Stephen Hitchell, who's an experimental electronic musician from America, and I kind of I was he was a little bit he came out of a kind of a branch of music called dub techno, which was very textural kind of explorations of using dub techniques with electronic music. But he's got a whole back catalogue which I subsequently bought on Bandcamp, whereby he's got hour-long recordings. I think sometimes using modular kit. I think you would probably quite like his, but quite often he's doing yeah, switching on the equipment, jamming, and then that's his kind of piece. And he's got loads of things that are you could almost say minor variations of the theme and energy. But I think he's read the book that you were showing earlier. Um, there might be some errors or things that he might look back at, and I'm hoping to have an interview with him, but currently that's not happening. But the energy is out there to try and interview him about his music. But
Mm.
again, I think like for me, it's letting go of that kind of. I know when you grow up and care about music, sometimes you're going, well, I want it to be as good as that track by this person or that person. But the magic that they created meant that they might have made that track in an hour's time, jamming three drum machines and a synthesizer. They didn't know what they were doing. Didn't have a manual, and they just captured something at that moment. And I think it's the capturing of that energy in that moment, which would, if you go to the theory from that book, which is about the kind of source thing. And then I think it's letting go of the attachments to the commercial,
Yes, you're right.
and
Yeah,
then
you're so right.
and then maybe seeing if actually other people kind of just go, wow, this resonates. Because when I was listening to, if we go back to your yeah, iPad music, I was listening to some of your stuff, just the actual videos where sometimes you pitch it like you're demoing this new app.
Mhm.
I'm like, you're not demoing a new app, you're making an amazing musical creation here. And I'm like, well, I would invite you to get them all up on Bandcamp for purchase because I think a lot of people would love them. I think a long playing kind of hour-long journey, if you made them into what either a DJ mix or an ambient mix, it just flows. I think there's the way that you're exploring sound is rich, and I think people would love to. I was sitting in the bath trying to listen to some of them, and then YouTube adverts are coming on, and
Oh gosh, yes.
yeah. So again, a long format of your experiments, I think a lot of people would be truly resonant with. I think there's another guy called Rob the Bloke. I don't know if you've encountered Rob the Bloke, but I'll send you a link to him. He's a talented modular musician in Australia. And the stuff that he's putting up on YouTube is just ridiculously good long jams, sometimes really long, amazing arpeggios, amazing structures. And why he's not putting up these things for sale, I think his inner critic is this isn't good enough. And he's like, well, there's some mistakes. But I was like, well, if there is
Yeah,
mistakes, that's the beauty of you riding through that and then trying to find back into a groove. But and I think it's always nice if you see people who are taking risks and then they can recorrect the risk or they can get back on track. It shows that kind of human element of, oh, I explored this kind of thing out here and then it collapsed and then I was able to, I think there's a human thing when you see somebody pushing and playing, and I think it's a fascinating thing, really. So I would encourage you, maybe it's just about, having a healthy chat with your attachment mind and going, actually, come on, some of these things people might really love to sit and listen to, whether it's for meditation
yeah,
purposes or whether they might want to use it for multi dimensions. This particular guy, I will listen to him when I'm chilling out, sometimes when I'm working. There's different settings that I will choose to use his music for. Sometimes there's very little rhythm. Sometimes I think you'd find the way he manipulates sound and texture. I think he's got a number.
yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Graham. That's a good reminder. You're spot on. As I said, I struggle, perhaps like a lot of musicians, with the perfectionist mind. I think sometimes if you're producing an album, for example, it is good to get it right, and sometimes it's a good vehicle for perfectionism. That's part of the reason that creativity is great because you can perfect things. But you're so right. Sometimes it's just about getting it out there and stopping that critical mind, which I hear you. So thank you for that. Yes.
I mean, I'm saying that informed by Steve Young's book on alchemy. He's got an amazing book about the importance and artistic thing of alchemizing and fermenting and distilling and refining. So I kind of get it. I'm not saying don't do it, but then also
I'd love to talk to Steve about this because when I listen to his music,
Yeah.
the head flux stuff, it is perfect. He's got it to the point where of minutia. It's so well done, so well done. So I'd like to know how he works with flow versus those hours spent just getting the little bits right. Because he must be doing that because it's so
I think it was
technically perfect.
on his website. You can buy like a monthly membership, and he's got loads of tutorials where he explains his process. He talks about,
I think I should look at that because I do love his music.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
great.
he's a very talented guy on many different levels. Yeah, and so what was your journey? We've got a couple of minutes left, so I think maybe let's finish off with how did you start off with music? What kind of things inspired you when you were a young man? What was the bits of music that kind of pricked your ears up and got you excited about music?
Oh, so many. I'm an old metalhead really, so I think the first time I got really into music was listening to Steve Vai,
Okay.
the guitarist.
Mhm.
No, he's a rock guitarist, and I think so. One of the things I learned recently about myself, if we've got time, I think just a quick anecdote is what who is it that said about this? Brian Eno said, and there's two types of musicians. There's farmers and cowboys. Steve Vai is a farmer. He gets really good at what he does. So he buys a piece of land and the farmer analogy is he'll get really good at farming that land and can get some great crops out of it, but he'll always stay within this land. That's his farm. Steve Vai is a great guitarist who does wonderful music, but he's not an explorer. The
Right.
cowboys are the people that go out there and explore and want to do um,
Yeah.
new things all the time, always reinventing themselves. So I think that I'm a cowboy. I don't understand how people can just stay at doing one thing and not move on. So much as I love Steve Vai, he's still doing the same stuff he was doing 20 years ago. It's like, how come he's not moving on? And that's not a criticism. That's just my idea about music and my need for moving on and creating new things and finding new ways. So I'm definitely a cowboy. Do you think you're a cowboy or a farmer?
It's an interesting word, the cowboy. So I'm going to reflect on that over the break, and then I'm going to come back to you with some more. But I think it will be fascinating to chat more about your musical creations in the next interview. So that sounds like a rich interview.
Okay.
Catch you in a while.
Okay.
Right, take care.